Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History Value Podcast of your host, Jacob Berman. Today I'm joined by Henry Davis, author of Creating Christianity, a Weapon of Ancient Rome. Basically, it's another take on Roman provenance, the Roman origins of Christianity. And there are several books out there with different variations of this idea of Roman provenance. Um, And I'll leave a link to this book in the description so you can go buy it. Definitely check it out, guys. Okay, Henry Davis, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So I want to start off with what led up to you concluding that the New Testament is essentially a weapon of ancient Rome?
I suppose a quick answer to that would be the mass of evidence supporting that as the conclusion. I don't think there's any kind of secret that there isn't really evidence for I would say Christianity before Nero, or for Christians separating from Judaism before Nero. But the thing that led me to conclude that it was Roman is basically the way in which messages and names are left within the New Testament scripture and within historical documentation using various literary techniques to present names and information and messages. My work obviously is a continuation, I guess, on past scholars' work, and I became interested. I didn't think much of it, but when I looked into it and didn't just dismiss it, I guess, when I looked into each claim slowly and carefully, I realized that because of previous examples of classicists and other historians, what they have found, I realized that every claim checked out as long as you were careful and did your research. So I suppose, and when you kind of do that, then you realize that they had a motive for creating a new law at that time, because there was a war going on between the people and the aristocracy, and it was costing them money, and so they wanted to figure out a way to stop the uprising through literature. But obviously the Jews at the time, the Pharisees, would have known what was going on, and so I would say it looks like that's the reason Christianity didn't take off and why there were other rebellions after that, because the Jews at the time, the Pharisees, were still around, and they must have been informing people that it wasn't a true religion. So that's basically the conclusions I came to. It seemed logical to me.
Another major topic, one of the major topics in your book, involving the Piesos. In the back of your book, you cite Mark 1:7. Who is he that comes mightier than I? The Piso is me. I know that's typically not how it's translated. That's as a reference to Piezo, but you translate that particular Greek word there as a reference to Piso. Could you explain that?
Again, it's a difficult one to explain without the other massive evidence. It's not just that word is Piezo. So, okay, the the senatorial family, the Calpurnius Pisos, must have written that based on that word. It's basically that. I mean, that is like one
Right.
little smidgen of evidence, and it's not even. It's hard to explain. I suppose it's not. If he was just relying on that word being there or that passage or whatnot for the entire evidence, then it would be very, very weak indeed. What ties it all in is the massive evidence, and it's not as simple as, say, defending the evidence for the parallels,
Right.
which Joseph Atwill has made more mainstream. I know the parallels have been around before Joseph Atwill, but when you look at the parallels, it's easier to see the parallels within the works. But it's that's kind of he did a good job of sort of getting that out and getting people to take notice. I mean, even if mainstream academia hasn't taken notice of that, he did a good job. He made it simple to understand. But that's a kind of that's an easy part of it, even though it's not that easy. That's an easier part of it. And then you've got the more complex part of the way they presented, their names and different names and different clues within the New Testament. So when you have a word like Piezo in there, no one would think, oh, that's related to the Calpurnius Piso family, because why would you? It's only when you link the multiple, the plethora of other evidence to it, think, okay, there's another Piso name. It can't just be coincidence, because all this other evidence before that just backs up, okay, is mainly the Calpurnius Piso family writing this with the help of their Flavian relatives.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. That's not what I was not trying to insinuate that that's all.
No.
Yeah. What I really meant to ask is, why did you translate that differently, that particular verse in Mark?
Well, as I say, my work based on previous work done on the Pisos. I know that Abelard Reuchlin did work on the Calpurnius Piso family author in the New Testament. He wrote a book about it. I know it. I don't think it's been widely read, possibly because of the way it was presented. I don't know. And then I also read Piezo Christ by the scholar known as Roman Piezo. And again, when I was looking through his work and Abelard's work and Joseph Atwill's work, and then going through the evidence they present and the claims they present, I was just looking at it, first of all, from my own satisfaction, to make sure that there was a basis for them, for in Piso Christ, for claiming that those words represent the Piso family. And when I looked into it for what they were saying, and I looked into the work of other mainstream historians and how the Hebrew language works and how the Greek language works, and then knowing that there was nothing to stop the aristocracy at the time from pretty much doing what they wanted to do in terms of how they writ things and what they did. And so, when you have Piezo, I mean, I sent off a paper to a journal to be sort of peer reviewed, and the review of the paper came back with more or less the same kind of feedback, which was helpful, to say that it, saying Piezo is the Piezo is merely wordplay. But again, it's kind of knowing that the O can be used as the, and then you have Piezo, and then you have the, again, the plethora of other information, because it's not just that word. I mean, there's multiple things, you know, there's
Right.
666, 616, Josephus being taken in by, you know, the Roman generals when, you know, and realistically he should have been killed, because, you know, the Roman generals weren't known for their generosity, to, you know, rebels like Josephus, you know, taking them back and killing them or making them slaves. But it seems they kept him on to try and convince the Jews to surrender, and when that didn't
Yeah.
work, they kept him in the house, the Flavians. And to me, that's just is ridiculous by all intents and purposes. He should have been killed after he'd worn out his usefulness to them. So it's a whole picture, big picture of little details that, you know, make you come to the conclusion. I mean, the word Opizo might not be representative of the Piso family, but because of the other evidence, I've agreed that yes, I can see how that would be the Piso.
To what extent would you say that the Pesos were involved? I mean, I know that you have this particular Piso as being the author of not just Mark, but you think that this particular Piso wrote all four Gospels. Am I correct on that?
It seems to be the case. I wouldn't say he writ them himself. I would say he had help.
Right.
He had what it seems to be. He had a kind of rough draft from his a family before him, where they were trying to kind of figure out what to do. So he had that, and I think that quite possibly, yes, the first gospel he would have writ himself, because I could see his mind frame being in that, oh, I want revenge on the Jews, so I'm going to write this and get rid of their religion, and they're going to follow our religion, and we'll tell them what to do. The other gospels, he would have probably had a big hand in writing it, but I think he would have had help from his Herodian relatives, I would say, and possibly from his sons at that time, if they were old enough to help him. It's difficult to say. It's difficult to say whether he would have done it all on himself. He was certainly seems to be the kind of main person that oversaw the creation of this work. I think is a bit of a stretch to say. I can't remember whether I sort of said it in my book, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that he did all the work himself, because I think that would be, that would be unrealistic. But he certainly had help.
What led you to the conclusion that, like, you say that in your book that Josephus didn't exist, but he's really the same Piso that's mentioned in Mark, Arrius Calpurnius Piso.
Yeah.
What similar is there similar, like, what are the similarities between this Arrius guy and Josephus? Are their lives very similar?
Yes. Well, their lives are similar. I mean, you've got the dates of when Josephus was said to have been born, and when, based on the current understanding of history of when we don't get any more work from Josephus, or when they gather he died. And then we have mentions of, Sesenus Paetus linked to Calpurnius Piso, who died, and then that son gets exiled. And you kind of work out when that son would have been born. And then you have the parallels, obviously, and then it's it's tricky, because you have the 666 number, and the 666 number is being taken seriously as relating to Nero, but when it's mentioned that 666 can be related to Flavius Josephus, it's kind of sneered at, and that's something I can understand in a way, but then I can't understand why it hasn't been looked at, because we know Josephus was closely related to Christianity in the New Testament. So when you look into the numbers and you realize that the 666 can add up to Christ Flavius Josephus. So that's one thing. You think, okay, that's quite interesting. It's not enough though. And then you have you have little things like sort of I am the Alpha and the Omega, which shouldn't really be Alpha and Omega. And then you have in Revelation you have the blood of the Lamb, which by all intents and purposes should be Arnios or Arnion, sorry, but but written is Arnios, which is just weird because the normal word for lamb is Arnion, so why use Arnios? And then you go to the work done by Sir Ronald Syme, the late Sir Ronald Syme, considered a brilliant historian in ancient Rome. He did work into the Piezo family, and when he was researching it, he couldn't understand why the daughter of Gaius Calpurnius Piso and Arria the Younger would be called Fania in history. He was confused by that there should be, he didn't understand why they would call him Fania. But then you kind of see it as N's changed to R's, because her mother was Arria. So it's obvious that they changed the N's to R's, and then the F was a Flavius, because they're related to the Flavians. So it's hard to explain without sort of reading it, but it's all those things. And then when you try to look into Josephus's ancestry, you don't find anything at all. It's as if like sort of nothing, no one knew about him at all. It's as if the guy didn't exist. So you turn to documents documenting the Flavian family, because in history he's portrayed as being adopted by the Flavians. So you think, okay, by process of elimination, let's check the Flavian documentation and see if anything is mentioned about his family there. And then when you look into Vespasian's family, you realize that the parallels between Vespasius Pollio and Herod Pollio are striking, but they're difficult to find. They didn't make it easy, and it's almost as if they wanted to not make it easy, but wanted it to be there. And so when you're looking through that, when you find out who Vespasian's mother really was, who she was a daughter of, then you get the connection, and then you go down and you can see like sort of ancestors of the Herod Pollio and Queen Berenice coming out through archaeological finds, and then you see them using the names Berenicianus, but well, we don't know anything about Herod Pollio and Queen Berenice's sons, but we do have a Tigranes married to a woman called Opgali, which nothing is known about her, and you kind of get the connection then, because at the same time we know the Herodian family were very incestuous, and so you kind of you begin to link it all together with little pieces of information like that, and you have to be very strict with it and just not say, okay, yeah, I found a link. You have to sort of criticize it as much as you can, and when you can't criticize it any further, think, okay, well, this must be the case then.
So when you look at this, when you look at the Flavians,
Yeah,
you claim that they are the descendants of Herod the Great.
yeah.
Could you, what were the what are the highlights, like the best evidence for that you can present here?
The best evidence, the best evidence I could present would be the parallels between Vespasius, the life of Vespasius Pollio and the life of Herod Pollio, and then comparing, creating like sort of creating information, writing down details between Herod Pollio and Vespasius Pollio, and then comparing details between his sons, Vespasius Pollio's sons, Vespasius Pollio's daughter as Vespasia Polla, and then connecting the sons of Herod Pollio, and then sort of, I guess you have to be looking for it. So the connection for me came through the numismatic evidence of Vespasia Polla being op Galli, because Galli and Galla can be they can be the same thing, and Galla means the same as Pollio, and then you have the op Galli related to Marian Tigranes, and Tigranes is related to the Herodians, and then you have the Flavian connection. Vespasius Pollio and Herod Pollio both have connections to Queen Berenice and Agrippa, and so it kind of it's very difficult, because I think I can't remember if Joseph Atwell said the same thing, but it's when he was asked for one piece of evidence, it's I think the reason why people didn't take him seriously within mainstream academia was because it's not just one piece of evidence, it's a whole plethora again. But yeah, it's it's difficult. I mean, it kind of, again, it's kind of looking at the work of other scholars like Steve Mason, that couldn't understand certain things that Josephus had written about, the Flavian family and things like that. And that's what led me on to trying to find, trying to work out Josephus's ancestry. And then when you don't have anything, when you come up with nothing, there's no record of, you don't find anything through looking for Josephus' family. You only find the ancestral connections that Josephus gives when you uncover the Piezo and Flavian connection, and it made it difficult to find because it's an important connection. But again, you have to kind of read the whole bit of information, which really gives you a better clue about the bigger picture. I mean, if someone read one part of it, then I wouldn't expect them to be convinced, quite frankly. So I read a part of this, or I read a bit of that, and I'm not convinced. I said, well, I wouldn't expect you to be convinced just by a part of it. It's like reading a part of Rome and then someone saying, oh, I don't think ancient Rome existed. Well, of course it existed, but read the whole history of ancient Rome and then you'll understand why certain things happen.
You also, in your book, you look at additional numismatic evidence or etymological evidence that indicates that Jesus himself was understood as Piso.
Yeah.
Other than that, are there anything in like biographical parallels between Piso and Jesus?
Yes. Again, it's complex. Again, it comes down to you begin with the parallels of between the Gospels and the work of Josephus. So once you can understand and see the parallels, then you go on. It looks like on the surface that the parallels between Jesus and Titus in the origin of Josephus is Titus Vespasian's son. But then you kind of you go through it, and then you don't see any links, shall we say, typologically, or any literary techniques being used to present Vespasian's or Titus Flavius's name. You have obviously the name Titus in the New Testament, but the majority of the literary techniques used present the name Piezo or Arnius or Arrius or Calpurnius in various different ways. And I think I went through majority of the ways are found in the book of Revelation. And to understand why a lot of the information is given in the book of Revelation, you have to understand the rivalry that seems to have taken place between one of Arrius Calpurnius Piso's sons, Julius Calpurnius Piso, who in history is known as Julius Servianus or Severus. And it seems that he must have had a falling out with his siblings, because through historical documentation, by all intents and purposes, Hadrian was going to choose him to be the next emperor, because Julius had, he'd been loyal to his family, he'd been loyal to Emperor Hadrian, he'd put down the Bar Kokhba revolt war, and so he wanted to be rewarded. It is possible that Hadrian didn't give the emperorship to Julius Piso because of his age, but then they agreed that Julius Piso's son or grandson could become emperor. And then we find that Hadrian suddenly changes his mind and gives the emperorship to Antonius Pius. And so you have that's not been fully explained within academia, but then when you read this information, you can understand that there was a rivalry, that it doesn't look like he wanted to be any part of the creation of the New Testament, because it looks like he was writing John, and they are like the shortest works in the New Testament. So then you get to Revelation, and then you get all of the Piezo, the numbers in that, but obviously you can only see it if you read it in original language. If you don't read it in original language, you're not gonna see it, you're not gonna understand it. You have the beast, the mark of the beast, number of his name 666, and then 666 is only outside biblical writing, is only used in antiquities by the man called Josephus. And then they try to change the New Testament from when Constantine got in power. The New Testament was changed to Latin, which doesn't make any sense because the majority of people knew the Greek language. But they tried to change the number 666 to 616. Why would they do that? Well, we know that 600 spells out Christ, and 16 spells the name Piezo. So you have the changing it to a different language, which makes no sense. Then you have the changing of the number, which makes no sense. And then you have you have different numbers, like 10 representing Jesus. Then you have K is the 10th letter of the Greek alphabet for Calpurnius. Then you have other things like number 30, for instance, represents Jesus Flavius by the sequence system. There's a whole load of little details, which I think is why it's difficult for people to get their head around, because it has taken me a number of years to understand what's being presented, and it's taken me a number of years to actually agree with it. I didn't agree with it for how many years, but when I slowly got through it, I was like, okay, it makes sense, because scholars don't know. Apparently, they have an idea of how Christianity started, but by all intents and purposes, they don't, because there's the argument that it's not a community of Christians going around and spreading the word. It was educated elites, but then that position is seen as radical. So I'm like, well, which one is it then? There's obviously academia doesn't have a clue of how it started. They're still, still trying to figure it out. And then, obviously realize a war was going on. The aristocracy were fighting against the people, and then you realize who was in charge at that time.
So the Pisos, they were the Piso conspiracy, as you know, they were kind of rounded up a couple of times in the first century CE.
Yeah.
There was I think the first one took place during Tiberius, correct?
Yes, I think it did. Yes.
Yeah, and the second one happened under Nero.
Yes, yeah, the famous one.
Right.
Yeah, the Pesonian conspiracy.
So after the whole Nero fiasco, there didn't seem to be much of them left. And then the Flavians come in, they take power after the year of the four emperors. So Piso, I guess this is the question I'm asking. What is Piso's connection to the Flavians in his agenda to, as you say, he pretty much wrote himself in as being Jesus Christ. He turned into this Hellenized Jewish Messiah.
Yeah. Well, the connection again is, it looks as though that there was trouble when the Sadducean sect in Judea were being overrun by the Pharisees. They called upon Rome to help, and that's when they installed Herod the Great as, a client ruler. And that was fine. That there was a agreement up until Nero, when it began to break down. So then the Pharisees gained control, and they wanted a more democratic form of government for the people, to abolish slavery. Obviously, the aristocracy didn't want that because they enjoyed their lifestyle based on slavery. So when Herod died and the Pharisees were essentially in power in Judea, that's when Rome stepped in, because what the evidence presents is that the Flavians and Piesos are descendants of the Herodian royal family through Arrius the Younger and through Herod Polio. And so, and then if I just write, I've got to remember myself because there's so much information. So you have Herod Polio, and then you have the daughter Vespasia Polla marrying Titus Flavius Sabinus, who has two sons, Vespasian and Vespasian's brother, Titus Flavius Sabinus II. And so Vespasian obviously has his family, and then Titus Flavius Sabinus II gets connected with the Piesos. It's a long time since I looked at this. I'm trying to remember offhand. It's basically, but it's from the Flavians, basically Vespasian and Titus Flavius Sabinus, and then I lost my train of thought now. So you have that connection there. They're related to Pesos from there. And then the evidence looks like Seneca the Younger was related to the Piesos as well. I think I've written about that on my website. So it was basically a family effort. Basically, it wasn't just a war effort. It was a personal problem. It was basically the Pharisees were attacking the in-laws of the Piesos through Gaius Calpurnius Piso's wife Arria the Younger, and also obviously Vespasian's ancestors, the Herodians. So you can, when you piece together the genealogical connections, then you can see, okay, these three families, apologies, had a motive. They had a motive for creating a new religion, a new law, to attempt to quell the rebellion. Obviously, it didn't work as intended, but you can see the motive there, and it's kind of like, I suppose, can we say for 100% that is what happened? Well, in history, we can never be 100% sure because we're working on what we have. But considering that a new book out by Robin Faith Walsh, The Origin of Christian Literature, argues that only the elites of the time after the war could have written the kind of prose found within the New Testament, then you put it together, you think, well, yes, I agree with that. But based on this, I agree that, yes, it couldn't have been, illiterate people. It had to have been people within the elite who had a motive. And the people that had a motive, which isn't widely known yet, is the Herodians, Calpurnius Piso, and the Flavians. So it's a lot of rabbit holes to go down.
All right. So basically, my next question is Paul. How does Paul fit into this identification with Piso exactly? And do you think Paul's letters were written before the Gospels or simultaneously with the Gospels?
I have to say that I haven't done a lot of work on Paul, but what I will have to say on that point is that it's a very good point. That the only person that I know that has made claims about Paul not being Paul is the author of Roman Piezo and Piezo Christ. He has made the claim that Paul was actually Pliny the Younger, who was a relative of the Calpurnius Piso family, and he got adopted in, and he emerges under various names within his works and within the New Testament. I have to hold judgment on that one. I'm pretty sure it will be accurate because from my point of view, what I've investigated has checked out. If I didn't think it checked out, I wouldn't publish it. I wouldn't write it. His main, Roman Piso's main claim is that the work of, if you know Latin and Greek and you read the work of Pliny the Younger side by side with the epistles of Paul, then in certain letters, every other word matches. I cannot say whether that's the case or not because I haven't done the work on that. I will be doing the work on that, but I've got to get around to it. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
I see.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that sort of connects Paul to Pliny the Younger is that when Pliny is writing about his travels in his letters, his travels are the same travels as Paul. They're the exact same places, which could be coincidence again, but I'm going to hold judgment on it. But again, I wouldn't be surprised.
I see. my final question for you is, since you just said that you wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be true, if one
Yeah,
were to assume that it's true,
yeah.
would that mean that Paul, that would, because there's Pliny the young, we're talking about Pliny the younger being Paul or the elder,
Pliny the Younger.
right? Pliny the younger, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means replacing, because there's Pliny clearly wrote much later, that would insinuate that he wrote after the Gospels.
Yeah, that's what seems to be the case. Yeah. I think I I think the evidence for the Herodians, Flavians, and Piezo's being involved with the New Testament is there. People just have to read it, and digest it. The evidence for Paul, Pliny the Younger being Paul, and to be able to digest and get for someone to get their head around that claim, I think is a difficult one. Because Paul is like a major part of the New Testament. But one thing that does interest me is that it's not just Roman Piso's in Piso Christ books claim. I don't think it's just on him. I think that the professors of the University of Oxford published a encyclopedia called the Encyclopedia Biblica, and within that they investigated various claims about various different aspects of this subject, and they investigated the claim of the Dutch radical scholars that made the claim that none of the epistles of Paul were written by the individual Paul. They dismissed all of them. And they basically agreed for the most part that that was correct. Now, I know that a logical argument could possibly be that, okay, when was the Encyclopedia Biblica written? And I believe it was the copy I have was from 1901. And so people could say, well, that's outdated research, which I can understand the viewpoint on that. But then you also have different scholars saying, well, Paul did this, and Mark did this, and so did this. And so you could argue, well, you're kind of thinking that Paul existed, but he wrote way before the professors of Oxford. So you can't dismiss a work from 1901 when you're not really dismissing the Pauline epistles that are written much earlier and have been doubted and still being questioned. But saying that, I can understand the kind of skepticism on that, because I'm skeptical as well at this point. I'm with the skeptics on that one until I kind of look into it.
Well, okay, Henry. Thank you for joining me. I enjoyed this conversation very much.
Yeah, likewise.
I will link to your website and to your book in Amazon in the description.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to go buy it.
Would I be allowed to ask what you thought of the book?
I think it's I personally think it's intriguing. And I like to look further into it.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Do you understand the basis of it, or the sort of majority of it, or is it still kind of sort of up in the air, or still kind of not making sense of that, if that's the right word?
I think I'm more like in between.
Yeah.
It's definitely I definitely need to look at the evidence, the claim evidence a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
No, that's yeah, that's fine. Yeah, like I said, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, same here. No problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.